for me, it's not loneliness. It's more the opposite. Like,
You're like intentionally choosing to be
yeah,
like more
yeah,
on your own kind of thing.
yeah.
I accidentally hit myself in the face yesterday, so
Yeah, I
that's
saw it in your story.
I was digging a hole for the outhouse that we just built because there's no plumbing up in the cabin. So we were trying to like build one before winter.
Okay.
I don't have to like go all the way down to the house to use the bathroom or like literally freeze my butt off. Yeah, like I didn't break it or anything. It just looks embarrassing.
How many people live where you are?
On the island, I don't know, probably a couple 100,000 total.
And
Have you ever been to Prince Edward Island when you were in Canada?
No, I mean, I had only 2 weeks. Canada is definitely the country I would like to explore more because I know it's so huge and there's so many interesting, landscapes.
Yeah, most people, like my friends from the States, don't really know where PI is because it's kind of out of the way. Like it's pretty rural, like a lot of agricultural land, but like so it's like kind of less wild than Newfoundland
Okay.
because there has been like large scale agriculture and like land clearing and stuff.
Right, but you have the seaside.
Yeah, like it's probably 15 minutes to go to the Atlantic Ocean where I live, like the eastern side of the island.
Yeah, great.
This place is known for a lot of like sandy beaches and like really nice sunny summers and like fresh seafood. So a lot of kind of like people from central Canada or the States come to visit.
Do you live on a farm or like with a family or you have your own shed or?
Well, my friend's property, like they built a house and they have like a little kind of like homestead and like their own greenhouse and raised beds for gardening. And 10 years ago, their friends built a cabin in the woods, like with the intention of staying for a long time. But they ended up moving away. So basically just the thing I live in is that cabin that like we've been fixing up. So it's like an existing structure. I just had to re-insulate it and do a bunch of work to make it like more livable because there was raccoons that broke into it and stuff. So like a lot of the insulation I had to throw out and just like redo a few things, put a wood stove in. Like you can tell the people that live there were kind of like, well, we live here, we just need to make it work for the time being. Like the initial part of the house makes a lot of sense, and then there's other parts where it's just like you can tell they were fed up with the project.
So here's the cabin from the outside. We've had a lot of snowstorms, so that's actually the edge of the roof, but you can't tell because the bottom of the wall is buried, and there is my outhouse.
And I also like didn't entirely know how to do a lot of things. I'm just kind of learning as I go and like asking my friends because they built this place.
But it sounds like a good challenge.
They built a tiny house initially that was off grid. And this is like the original bedroom loft. And then they built extensions because they had 2 kids. So they just needed more like living space and more rooms, essentially.
So you are far away from bigger cities, but you are with friends.
So I don't feel like I live totally alone in the woods. It's like I'm kind of like a satellite. Like here's where I use internet and like charge my lights for my house because I don't have like power up there. I have oil lamps and rechargeable camping lights that they borrowed or that they lent to me. So it's weird, like my computer's so old that I can't really do anything on it, even like watch a movie, it'll just die. So I need to figure out for the winter like how to get a thing I can charge off my truck battery or something so I can like plug stuff in.
Yeah.
The fact that there's no plumbing or power in this place, like friends of mine that are like, you had a choice between renting a room in Montreal for the winter and like fixing up a place that's like 5 degrees at night with no water, no electricity, and you chose that.
Yes.
And I'm like,
yes, sure. More challenge.
Like, I think a lot of people would think it's really weird and antisocial, but I'm like, it's not antisocial though. Like, the people that live here help me with projects, and then I'm like available to help them with stuff. It's about a 30-minute drive to Charlottetown, which is the biggest town on PEI. Like, there's kind of like more of a social scene. There's like a university, there's like restaurants.
Wow.
So it's kind of like the biggest town on the island type thing. But they have like an independent cinema, and there's a few things that are like reasons I drive to town, just to like go to the library or something like that.
I have a similar town, and every year I tell myself I should go to the film festival they host there, and it passed again and I didn't make it. And I had a few Tinder dates there, but they were all totally useless, like good looking but useless. And some students, every time I drive by there, like I do things like going to the doctor, dentist, whatever. I don't know what it is, but I find so many excuses not to go to cities.
Because I'm not working right now, and most of what I do is involving like needing stuff from the hardware store, I'll go to Montague, which is like a 10-minute drive, and just go to the hardware store and then go home. Like, I'm like, I don't want to.
Store is essential. The first year I also had a lot at the hardware store, but I'm really glad it's big enough that I can paint here. So I mean, not huge paintings, but as you see in the back, stuff like that. And then the internet connection is good because I can make Zoom calls. I started a job as a German tutor, and I didn't expect it to be so fun, but at the same time that fixes my social needs, because it's like traveling without travel, but it's the other way around, because I learned languages by traveling, and now I teach people that I meet via online tutoring, and it's very cool. They come from all sorts of different countries.
Like, the thing I like about living more in the middle of nowhere is it's like less, like, you feel like you're less just seen by your neighbors and stuff. Because when I've lived in smaller towns like in Newfoundland, like, everybody knows everyone's business, but here it's like we're like off of the road in a forested area, so there's less of that whole, well, people that live on PEI are still similar, like rural people are like, oh, like, who are you related to, like, why did you end up here? So it's a weird place to be sometimes. I'm like, how did I end up here? Out there, are there many like types of public transit? Like, are there trains that go from where you live to the city?
Yeah, but I never take them, but my visitors take them. I had quite a lot of visitors.
I don't know, certain times, like when friends would move outside of Montreal and buy land and stuff, like, just nobody would see them unless they drove, because there isn't big of a network. Like, there's a commuter train, but it's not very big of a network. So depending where you move to, it could not really be accessible unless you drive. But here, there's not even any trains at all on the island.
What was your initial idea to leave the city behind?
Well, I moved to Newfoundland like 4 years ago from Montreal, just because I was kind of sick of like the punk party scene, and like, I was like, I'm not really enjoying this anymore. Why do I just do it? Is it out of habit, or is it just like what I feel is socially available to me in the city? I just also wanted like a better life for Juniper and stuff, like more space for her to run around.
Your dog, yeah.
When I was living in Montreal, I was just stuck working in restaurants, and I didn't really want to do that anymore. So wanting to work more doing like farming and landscaping and stuff that's like basically outside, and I can do things that I already like. I felt like those kind of jobs would be easier to get outside of Montreal.
Definitely.
I remember, because I grew up in like a pretty small town area, like, the idea of wanting to live somewhere like that was really weird, because I was like, I can't find anybody I relate to that's my age. Like, I would have to go to bigger cities to like most of my friends were older punks who had like dropped out of high school, that I would meet at all ages shows. So like, the idea that I now live in a place with probably like a similar population to where I grew up is like really crazy to me.
Yeah.
Because I remember being like, oh man, like this sucks here, like there's nothing to do. All these people are really conservative. But it was because that's the kind of place where everyone knows like a few generations of your family. So it felt like your life was kind of decided for you already. You're like, oh, you're like so and so's kid, and like you're weird, and like everyone else is doing all these things and like trying to get married in high school, and you just like don't care. So you're probably gonna stay the same way forever. And like my dad's an immigrant from Slovenia.
Interesting.
That part of Ontario, it's a lot of Polish and Hungarian people from that part of Europe who were like sick of communism or like sick of their lot in life and just like moved to Canada, but they all kind of got farms in the same area. They're very much like they had a bunch of kids because they had a farm and they need people to help them work on the farm. So that's why I exist.
Hey, they almost succeeded. You lived on some sort of farm, not on their farm though, and you don't help them much, but still.
The funny thing is like my dad is really into gardening, but he thinks that farming is like for uneducated people because he became an engineer, and he was like, you know, I went to school so like you wouldn't have to like work in the dirt. And I'm like, I like farming. I'm more like growing things for my own benefit and like the benefit of my friends than the idea of doing it for money full time. I also don't own land, so it's not like a thing that's very easy to do. I feel like people have a lot of grand notions about farming, but like unless you inherit land or already have a lot of money, it's like actually pretty hard to make a living doing it.
Totally. Same here.
Yeah, I did have a friend out in Newfoundland as well who had a farm and was like, if you want to try to have a market garden here as a form of income, so just like small scale farming, you can use my land. And so I ended up living there in a trailer for a few months until I just like wanted to find a different place on my own. It was like a weird transition from living in Montreal to moving there, which was like pretty isolated.
Quite extreme, no?
Yeah, like I was like, oh, this will be fine. It's not a big deal. And then I was like, actually, I kind of have to make friends at some point because I'll get lonely as an adult in a place where I don't really know anybody. Like people were kind of confused as to why I moved there for no particular reason, because they're like, there's not a lot of options here. Like it's an island, utilities are expensive. Why did you just move here by yourself? And I was like, good question.
You were like the number one weirdo of the island, or what did they make?
Yeah, I mean, like when I was living at my friend's place, they were like, they know him as an older punk. And so he's had friends visit over the years who are kind of like traveling punks. So I think people in that town were used to him being kind of a character, but also like a very helpful person. So they weren't like afraid of the differences in people he hung out with. But when I went to this other small town and ended up living in a barn, there was a lot of people that were okay with that. And then there was a few people that were like, you're ruining my property values. Like, how dare you live in this building that's not technically an apartment?
What? Really?
Yeah, like there's people that reported it to town council. The funny thing is they sent like a town council person out to investigate the complaint. But I think I was out of town that week, so it didn't look like anyone lived there.
Great.
I was like, I'm not throwing parties. I'm literally just like existing in my house and like probably living a pretty tame lifestyle compared to when I was in Montreal. But like, because I'm not in a nuclear family, I'm weird.
Like, yeah, that sucks about countryside. And it's interesting to hear that, because I have this image in mind that Canada is kind of progressive thinking, but it seems as conservative or like spießig. We have this word spießig in German. And what would you say after now it's your 4th year outside big city? So what about the essential your essential motive to move out there, like being sick of the punk scene and being bored?
It's been like good and bad, because obviously there's like a transition period where you're like kind of lonely and you're like, I wish the convenience of wanting to do certain things and them just being put on by someone else. Like, you don't have to create your own culture in that way. You can go to things that already exist that other people are doing, and it's like entertaining. Whereas here it's kind of like you're more faced with yourself and have to make things for yourself to do.
Absolutely. But I got used to it. That's the thing.
Yeah, like I know some people kind of, they're like, I'd never live in the country, it's too boring. But it's like, only if you have the mentality of I need to be entertained constantly. Like if you have artistic stuff that you have to work on your own that like gives you fulfillment, you don't need to be like going to a million punk shows or like going to all these things constantly to kind of like fill the void. I don't know. I still sometimes I'm like, it's nice to visit cities, but I don't think I'd want to live in one again.
I feel
I do miss like variety of groceries though, and like cheap food, because I found like Montreal, there's just like you can find everything, and here it's like a lot more meat and potatoes-y. And I do miss like certain things, like just being able to like walk to your friends' houses if you do feel like being social.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I also miss more, like I was in the city because I had to pick up something last night, but somehow I didn't make an appointment. I was also more like, I would like to just hang out somewhere, but I didn't feel like going to a party. Like, I mean, I'm 50 now, 51, sounds cliche, but somehow this thing, like this concept, a room full of random people, like loud music, doesn't appeal to me so much anymore. Like it's weird. And the funny thing is, I feel like I became more the sort of person that I was in my puberty or a bit later, because I wasn't always like this extrovert party, like I represent my art here type of person.
it's like I don't need to blow off steam in the same way as I used to. Like, want to just get obliterated and like drink a lot or like do a lot of drugs, because I'm like, my life isn't that bad anymore that I need to escape from it in the same way. I'm glad I don't live in a city, but I also don't totally feel like involved in anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the city is overwhelming, but like sometimes the alternative can be like pretty isolating unless you're good at finding people that you can really relate to, or like I try to keep in touch with friends that like I've known over the years type thing, like through writing or just like video calling people or talking to people on the phone, just so you feel like connected to people that you're close to, but without needing to be in the same space geographically.
Yeah.
So I make more of an effort to just like call people that you don't feel like you have to explain yourself to.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to like make friends in an area where people might be coming from a different place, it's like harder to find commonalities sometimes.
Yeah. What I was about to say is I remember you identifying as non-binary, and so loosely being part of not only punk but probably queer scene, whatever related.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to ask that, but I mean, does that still matter, or like isn't it a point anymore because nobody gets it anyway? So do you feel in a way it's also a sort of freedom because you don't have to define anything?
It's, I think, like a different situation with me. Like in Newfoundland, it's very much gendered, and people would like insist on like they call like women or people they think are women like missus or whatever. So like being constantly gendered there was like a weird thing, and especially through my work, because I was working with mostly like middle-aged men who were pretty conservative. Basically be called like woman all the time. And here, like one of my friends I live with is like identifies as non-binary, and like their kids use the right pronouns for me. So I think I'm in a weird situation where like sort of expressed in some way, but in terms of like queer community, there's like people in Charlottetown that are more, I guess like similar in age, but I also don't really care about astrology. So I feel like certain segments of the queer community, if you say that, they're like, you're canceled. Or like, it's just such a common frame of reference for people that if you're like, I don't really care about that, they're like, so
Like astrology? Did you really? Or what?
yeah, same with in Montreal. It's like such a big thing that people
Really?
care about.
Here it's like, are you okay? Like, I mean, I do care a tiny bit, like privately sometimes about astrology. But it's a thing from the past, but I don't, not in an esoteric sense, but it's a really personal, private thing, and I don't talk to people about it. But here in Germany, it's really like astrology.
Funny when people are like super into identifying as being queer and they're like, you know, outside of like rules and norms, and you can choose your own gender and sexuality and like appearance and all these things. And then they're like into this really deterministic concept of like, you were born at a certain time, so therefore your life is going to do this, or like your personality is essentially boiled down to this. So it's a weird thing. It seems like incompatible, especially if you're like anarchist leaning, you're like, or like, you know, into like existentialism or things where it's more flexible in like making meaning of your own life. I'm out of touch with the queer scene in general. I'm not a compulsive dater. I'm more interested in specific people, and like if there's mutual attraction, something will happen. But I'm not like the kind of person that needs to constantly be like dating or looking for people to date in that sense, because like people kind of stress me out.
Yeah. The weird thing is that now I notice again how people stress me out, because I can tell the difference, and I learned to really be by myself, which is a good thing. I think I have this loner thing, but somehow I was what you call a compulsive dater. Somehow in the city that triggered it even more, because you could, right? It sounds funny now, but to be honest, Berlin caused something like a social burnout with me, I realized later, because I could have played that game forever, and it was like, but it's going nowhere. Like, it's quantity instead of quality. And maybe now I have become some sort of hermit.
People are more embarrassed by not wanting to do that kind of thing anymore because it's seen as like backwards or prudish or something, and you're like, no, it just means I'm pickier, or like don't want the same forms of like stimulation or entertainment that I used to like 10 years ago.
Exactly. I'm tired. I don't want to repeat myself, and it's more
And
like
it kind of like boils down to people thinking you have to be a certain level of social to be normal, and it's like, why are we shaming ourselves into that parameter? If like you don't want to hang out with a lot of people, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just like, that's how you're comfortable existing.
nicely put. Starting my project was about like how much outer loneliness is cool, or as you said already, what is being normal, like if it makes you feel good. And isn't it all like, are we even loners? I mean, we're still pretty social, right? I mean, we are able to interact, but we just maybe have a need to, I think it's a need for withdrawal, right? We just feel better if we know there's
Yeah,
a
like
place where we can go to, where we don't have to justify our behavior. That's a lot for me. I'm really sensitive.
yeah, especially too like in certain contexts, especially like in cities or like when people are politicized. Like I feel like there was an era of time where in the punk scene, like people were just kind of waiting for you to say something stupid so they could like be like, well, I'm super anarchist and you said the thing that sucks and therefore I'm better than you. So it's kind of like a hard environment to exist in when you're already like ambivalent about being social. If I was at a party where I didn't know anybody, it would be very like hard for me to just go start a random conversation with someone. Like I'm not that level of social, but I'm comfortable in like groups of people where I maybe have some frame of reference or like a few friends there. But but I'm not like super outgoing. So I'm like kind of tend to the side of not doing a lot of things with people. Trying to communicate certain things to other people who communicate differently can be like complicated or just more work essentially than existing on my own. It kind of makes you reconsider who you hang out with, because I'm like, I don't feel weird socializing if it's with people who I don't feel like are judgmental or like expecting me to act a certain way for them to acknowledge my existence. So like, just if you're not in those high pressure social environments, then like socializing isn't as terrible. A lot of party scenes are kind of like that. It's like you have to have this appearance of being like cool and mysterious and
pretty and attractive and whatever, and
but not too intense, because then it's like scary to people. Like you have to be like intense enough to be fun but not like scary, you know what I mean?
I mean, I could also say I'm just totally disillusioned. It makes you more relaxed to be disillusioned.
Like, unless there's somebody that I'm interested in, I'm not going to force anything because I'm not afraid of being alone. I came from somewhere where there's the expectation that's kind of your goal in life is to like establish yourself, get married, like probably have a family, have some sort of career type thing. And like I eventually stopped like putting the question off, and I was just like, I don't want those things. Now I'm gonna go in the dark to my house.
Okay.
Send me your mailing address.
Okay. I will.
See if it actually makes it there. Anyways, have a good night.
Good night.